Ladies and gentlemen, it is official. I am a middle-aged man. 2 weeks ago, I turned 40. There are 3 stages to life. Youth, somewhat generously defined as lasting from birth to age 40. Middle-aged, from 40 to 60, and elderly thereafter. I am now firmly in that middle bucket. Youth is clearly behind me. At such a milestone, I take stock of my life. What do I have? What have I done? And what's left to do? And I realize I have a lot to be grateful for. And the order here is important. 1, I have a firm faith in God, a set of beliefs and values that governs everything that I do, setting goals, making decisions, and sticking with them through the tough times. 2, I've got a lovely, lovely wife who does not only support me in everything that I do, but also shares the same set of values, so keeps me honest about them. 3, I've got 2 lovely kids, and they keep me on my toes whenever I become complacent or lazy. 4, I've got a job that I truly enjoy with Morgan Stanley. I've worked there for 15 years. First, I was helping to build an industry-leading trading application, which values thousands of trades worth billions of dollars. And more recently, I was involved in building up our Budapest office, which now has over 1,000 employees in just 7 years. 5, I've got my academic inclinations, which will hopefully see me complete my PhD in computer science in a few months. And 6, I've got my hobbies that I feel truly passionate about. Chess, football, music, and most recently, speech crafting. But it hasn't just been successes all the way through. I've had some horrible failures in my life. Painful losses to low-rated chess players. Traders yelling at me when there was a bug in the system. Or my wife correcting me whenever I made a wrong decision. But some of the most spectacular failures in my life have come in connection with languages. I remember at age 17, shortly after my family moved from Hungary to Canada, my brother asked me to return some books to the library. I didn't think twice about it. I thought I spoke good enough English. I had studied it in high school for 3 years, and I had my certificate from the States to prove it. But unfortunately, the librarian didn't know about this. And she asked me something that I couldn't at all understand. Excuse me? I asked back 2 or 3 times. She kept repeating her question. I still couldn't understand it. I felt horrible. In the end, I just said, yes. I dumped the books on the counter and I made a very quick exit. I was shaken up for days. I didn't dare leave my apartment. I felt horrible. Years later, I had a similar experience. Needing to catch an urgent flight in Tokyo, it was clear that my taxi driver didn't know where to take me. But he started driving nonetheless and spoke to me in fluent Japanese, things I didn't at all understand. When he turned into some small side streets in a neighborhood I didn't know where it was, I realized I had to do something. Otherwise I would miss my flight, I'd be dumped in the middle of nowhere with an astronomical taxi bill to pay. So I mustered up all my courage and language skills, and I got him to drive me back to the hotel. And there, one of the hotel staff saved the day by translating for me. Language is truly a double-edged sword. It can open up doors for you, it can make you friends, it can give you a whole new world, but at the same time, it can make perfectly intelligent people feel completely stupid about themselves and rid them of their last bit of dignity. But failures like this don't come without warning signs. I remember as a child, my grandmother, who spoke German at home, was determined to teach me this beautiful language. Der, die, das. I decided to ignore her and go play football with my friends. My father also told me countless times, learn languages whilst you're young. Don't just focus on English, start studying French. I decided to ignore him too. But we're all human. We all make mistakes. That's not the question. The question is, how do you respond? Do you draw back to your shell and never try again? Or can you draw motivation from your failures so that you change your life? After my spectacular failure with English in Canada, I spent the summer locked up in a room with high school kids from all over the world learning English from Mrs. Bíró, a lady with a Hungarian name. She didn't speak a word of Hungarian, but it's funny how Hungarians pop up everywhere in the world. But Mrs. Bíró really helped me to integrate and assimilate into that experience in Canada so that I could study in the high school. And years later, I realized that I started thinking and dreaming in English. A scary realization how languages actually impact your inner mental landscape. The way you process information, the way you think about things, and ultimately, the way that you behave. Hungarian, a very rigid, rule-abiding language. It's got a lot of expressions for the negative. Az a baj, hogy, jaj de kár, hogy. English, on the other hand, is a much more free-flowing language, much fewer rules to follow. There's no tegezés, magázás. I could even greet my teacher with a simple hello. I felt liberated and empowered. Japan at first left me as a complete outsider. But then I decided to start learning Japanese. After a few weeks, I managed to get around, speak in restaurants and taxis, and I continued learning Japanese long after I had left the country. I realized Japanese is actually a very difficult language to learn for English speakers, but as a Hungarian, there were many similarities in the logic of the language, in the structure, in the phonetics, even in some of the pronunciation. Russian. You know, the terrible language. Mandatory from grade 4, and everyone hated it. But years later, I realized there's a lot of good chess books that are written in Russian. And then I was truly kicking myself years later in New York, where I had a girlfriend from Moldova who spoke Russian and very little English. So I quickly brushed up on my basic Russian, and within a few weeks, I was dutifully speaking Russian to her parents. But the experience of being excluded applies as much at the national level as it does at the individual level. Nations that don't take learning languages seriously will be treated as outsiders by the international community, and they will be excluded. Luckily, the Hungarian government is starting to realize this. At Morgan Stanley, we're active participants in the Language Ambassador program. So we send our employees out to schools to tell kids about the importance of learning languages. I wish I had someone like that come to my school when I was growing up. Language ambassadors are role models, and their role in motivating kids to learn English is very, very, very important. But there's more to do. One issue that I personally feel strongly about is that of the dubbing of movies. I hope to lobby, together with MCHAN, to have more movies in Hungary shown in original language with subtitles. The internet also has a pivotal role to play in this fight for language supremacy. Language acquisition can be made so much more fun by watching movies online, interacting with native speakers. And I recently came across this website where you just walk into a virtual restaurant and you can start talking to anybody. The program even corrects your pronunciation and your grammar. It would have been so much easier to learn Japanese if we had tools like that. But most importantly, I want to be a role model for my own children to learn languages. I now speak 4 languages, more or less: Hungarian, English, a little bit of Japanese and Russian, but I started studying a 5th, French. But I realize now what my father told me 30 years ago. It's so much more difficult to learn a new language when you're a middle-aged man. But hey, c'est la vie.